Good morning. I'm going to talk about the J2b-L283 ancient samples that have been found. We're looking at a map, Google map that Flor Vesely made. The maroon markers are Bronze Age samples, orange are Iron Age. That means about 1,000 years BC is the cutoff from Bronze Age, Iron Age, or maybe it's 1,200 years. I'm gonna start this survey in Asia because the oldest J2b samples are from the Zagros Mountains of what is now Iran. So that's where our deeper homeland is. We don't know when our ancestors left this area, and there's kind of a long gap in ancient samples. There is no Neolithic JL283 sample that's found, or because it was a long bottleneck and only one line survived. That one line that survived became JL283 in the Bronze Age. So between during the Neolithic, either we only had one guy alive, or there were other sibling lines that died out. So let's look at this area that's closest to our deeper homeland. And we've got a sample near the border of what's now Armenia and Azerbaijan, and then there's a sample in the North Caucasus in Kabardino-Balkaria. Uh, I'll talk about this one first, even though it's not as old. This sample, Rise 408 is the ID. It's from 1090 BCE. It's near Lake Sevan. The name of this culture is Lechashen Metsamor. I'll read this briefly. Lechashen Metsamor culture is an archaeological culture of the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, 1500 to 700 BCE, in South Caucasus. It was mainly spread in areas of present-day Armenia. Lechashen Metsamor pottery was also found in Agri province of Turkey and in southern Georgia. Okay, I'm not going to read everything about it. One interesting thing how this sample relates to the greater history of the greater Near East is that Urartu was a state that eventually encompassed this site, this region of modern day Armenia. But Urartu was centered around Lake Van, and they conquered this site. And there's actually a victory stele or something that says, "I came here and I conquered everyone." Whoever was the king of Urartu, and then they took prisoners from there and used them to build fortresses in Yerevan, and they're the ones that built the capital of Yerevan, the state of Urartu. Urartu spoke, and there may have been several different languages spoken by Urartu. Anyway, it's not that we don't need to know about it because we were living there. Our guy, our relative, our relatives was living there before Urartu came. Um, so we don't know what language he was speaking. Urartu, we only know something about Urartu because they didn't write very much that was preserved, but the Assyrians wrote a lot about them, and they were rivals with the Assyrians at first. They became powerful, Urartu became powerful during a time when the Assyrians were in decline, and then later the Assyrians came back into power and defeated them. And then finally the Persians came and then defeated Urartu, and then they disappeared as a state. But I talked with an Armenian researcher, told me that anyone that had been living in that area probably is no longer living there today as a result of either Urartu displaced the population somewhere else, or when the Persians came, they displaced the population or killed people. The cool thing is, you can test for a SNP that this ancient sample from Lake Sevan was positive for, A28148. I had submitted this sample to YSeek, and they found this one SNP. I tested a Hungarian sample that's basal J2b-L283. That means he's negative for all the known subclades. I tested him for this. He was negative. So far, we haven't found anybody that's positive for it. But we can always test if someone looks like they could be. A little bit further north, we have an older sample. This used to be the oldest ancient J2b-L283. Then we found a slightly older, at 1864 BCE, 1864 BCE. Then we found a slightly older sample in Serbia. Well, not we. I didn't actually find any of these samples. But anyway, it's called KDC001 is the ID. It's the site is Kudachurt. It's in Bulgaria, Kabardino-Balkaria, what's now Russia. Russians took this area about 150, 160 years ago. A lot of the people that were living here, we call them Circassians, is their language family. They were displaced. A lot of them, most of them, are now living in Turkey. Uh, we don't know. We don't know what language this guy spoke. This is 1800 BCE. I think his autosomal DNA was similar to that found on the other side of the Caucasus. So maybe we were living in, but I guess in small numbers, somewhere between Lake Sevan and this sample in the North Caucasus. It's just not enough information, just two samples to figure out where they were all living. And but somehow later, our ancestors, well, later, not later than this sample, but I just mean somehow our ancestors did migrate. JL283 did migrate to Europe. Supposedly, there's some sample that's going to be released that's Copper Age from Moldova. I believe I've heard this, but it's hasn't been published yet. So instead, our oldest ancient sample within Europe, well, and whatsoever, is MOK15. It's from Mokran, Serbia. This guy was buried with his mother, I think, and he had a lot of status symbols. And you can click this link here and read more about him. I'm just doing a quick overview. This was 1950 BCE, approximately. Just reading an excerpt from the paper about this sample. At the opposite end of the status spectrum, a woman from the burial 181 was very likely the mother of the male in burial 163. That's our sample. And both were buried with grave goods indicative of higher social status. Since the male individual was an adult at the time of death, it remains unclear whether he inherited or acquired his status. This paper, they were interested to establish patterns of does status get passed on, or is it inherited, or do people have to gain it themselves? If you're interested, and it is interesting, you can read that paper to learn more about it. But I'm just doing an overview of the samples. Now let's look at the rest of the samples in Europe. The next oldest samples that are Bronze Age are a lot, several of them in Croatia. Guy that we've known about for a long time. Let me move this. You can't see it. I4331 from near Vrgorac today. He was found in a cave. He was a boy. He was the sample that we've known about for a long time. And he's on the Weifel tree. Here he is on the Weifel tree, about 1550 BCE. Sorry, I'm eating a chocolate. I sound weird if I talk. Here's the Mokran guy. So this Mokran guy is higher up. What we see is we have a lot of ancient samples from the Western Balkans that are below this branch, Z615. There's so many guys, and the samples are so old from the Western Balkans, and I guess this part of Serbia, if it's not really considered Western Balkans, it's close to the Pannonian Plain. So we think that we can be pretty confident that these ancestors had been living in the area between Western Balkans and the Pannonian Plain 5,000 years ago. If they weren't, then a lot of them migrated there from someplace else after that time. But before 1900 BC, because that's when the ancient sample was found. So they could have already been there about 5,000 years ago. By the way, these estimates, I've been told that some people consider that the Weifel estimates are not as old as they should be, that they're a little conservative. We will see as we find more ancient samples in our lineage how it holds up. I guess if you look at this ancient sample, this Croatian boy, 1550 BCE, this could be possible given that the most recent common ancestor, Z38240, he's estimated as having lived 1700 BC. So then this boy would have lived just a couple hundred years, about 150 years, give or take several hundred years after the most recent common ancestor of all these guys lived. Recently, a bunch of, that's an Etruscan. Okay, we'll get to him next. But because we're looking at this one branch, I'd like to just talk about the older ancient, the other Bronze Age sample. Okay, this isn't Bronze Age, this is Iron Age. A number of other Iron Age samples from the Balkans have been found in this branch of J2b-L283. Oh, there's the Bronze Age is further down. Further down in Z1297, there's a Bronze Age sample, about 1400 BC. That's another Bronze Age sample. There's so many Bronze Age samples from the Western Balkans that, and we have this. This is one branch that's there's no ancient sample in this branch that's got a lot of Albanians in it. There's no ancient sample in this exact branch, but the fact that there's this mostly Albanian branch that's dating from the Bronze Age Iron Age transition, and it's related to these ancient samples from Western Balkans and Mokran Serbia. So we think that the ancestors were living somewhere in this area. Okay, so this is just the Z615 branch, is the branch that definitely became established in the Balkans maybe 5,000 years ago, maybe not quite so far back in time, maybe a little bit further back in time if the Weifel estimate is too conservative. One guy I skipped over in this branch, a bunch of 5 different ancient samples were found recently in a study from different parts of Croatia. Well, just 2 different sites of Croatia, really. It's these 4 guys here, and the site is called Smiljan. I don't know. Floor may have spaced these apart just so that it's easy to see them. I think that that's what it is because all of them say Smiljan. So, oh, but they do have slightly different. Oh no, but I think he gave them different latitude, longitude, so that it's easy to see that there's 4. Otherwise, they're on top of one another. Anyway, these 4 guys are all related. They're all positive for Y86930. We're lucky that these samples had good resolution, so that we could place them exactly on the tree. And then there's another guy from a little further away. This is also in Croatia. This site is Mala Metalka, and they're positive for 86930 as well. Now, I made a map. Here's the map. Here in this pink circle, I just drew a circle that has both the 4 samples from this area, Smiljan, and this sample from further away, Mala Metalka. And I made, and you could see this on the map that I had looked at on Wikipedia, that it showed the Apodase were living around this area in between these two locations. And I added these pink hexagons. Don't ask me why I added it. Oh, why did I make it a hexagon? Because Microsoft Paint allows you to add hexagons. So these are the living guys living today. the descendants of this lineage. Look how close. They didn't even move very far away from where perhaps these guys were their direct ancestors, some of them. Or if they weren't, then they were closely related to their ancestors. They didn't live very much. These ancient samples that were found didn't live very much later than when the most recent common ancestor of Y86930 lived. Some guys on this line are living today. A guy from Germany, a guy from Ukraine, Kiev, and a guy from Bosnia, a Croatian speaker from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, Palestinian, a guy from Palestine, a guy from Syria, Aleppo, Syria. These guys are pretty diverse. If you look at the Y-full tree, the live version of the Y-full tree, we found something really cool. Not only were these Croatian, ancient samples from ancient Croatia, maybe they were Yapides tribe. Not only were found to be positive for Y86930, a new subclade was added just a few days ago. This guy from Germany, his ancestral surname is Meiser. Meiser. He shares a SNP with these guys, so he's more closely related to these guys from this tribe than the other ones. I don't know if the other ones either don't have a call for this SNP or if they're confirmed negative. This is just the live version of the Y-full tree. We'll see when the tree is updated next month. Incidentally, one of these guys that looks like he's related or descends from men of the Yapides tribe of Croatia. He's one of these guys is one of my sponsors on Patreon. On Patreon, you can sign up for kind of services that I offer at different levels. You can check out what I do. One of them is like a migration path, theoretical migration path that's automatically updated every month. I have other things on other levels of membership. One of the things I do is I give people heat maps calculated by software that I've written. This is a sneak peek of the JL283 heat map using Y heat map, which I've developed. This is a sneak peek of the new version of Y heat map that will be released soon. I'm working on it. People that sign up for my Patreon will get sneak peeks of development behind the scenes, what's coming up next that other people won't be able to see, or they won't be able to see until a few weeks later. So you get a sneak peek of all the cool stuff I'm working on. Moving along, let's look at the Etruscan now. First, let's look at the branch that this guy's in, JCTS6190. It was recently split. A guy from Serbia split that branch, and then everyone else that used to be just called CTS 6190, they're positive for this other SNP. There's only one ancient sample found in this lineage so far, but it's Iron Age, about 600 BC, and Y-full code. It's represented on Y-full with the code for Rome, but the precise location you can see, it's called Civita Vecchia, or Civita Vecchia. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. Oh. So this was it's close to Rome, but at this time this was controlled by the Etruscans. This was part of the Etruscan kingdom. Another sample was found. It was lower resolution. We don't know exactly which branch of Z38240 that this other sample was found, about 365 BCE. So there's another ancient Etruscan sample. So we know this line somehow migrated to Etruria sometime before 600 BCE. If that there's a lot of this guy's relatives are living in Italy today, particularly northern Italy. Sample from La Spezia, Genoa, and where's the other one? Firenze. So we know this guy was living here 600 BC, and There's all these guys that trace their descent from there today. When did they get there? We don't know yet. The genetic evidence doesn't show us exactly when that happened, but if we assume that this guy from Serbia, if we assume the guy from Serbia is indicative of he's a remnant that was just always living in Serbia, and if that was approximately the homeland in the Balkans, because these other Bronze Age samples are from the Balkans, then that would be a simple explanation. Then the migration could not have been before 1300 BC, because that's when the common ancestor of this Serbian guy and everyone else who's Z34474 lived. So we will see. Yeah, the most recent common ancestor of all these guys from Italy and the ancient Etruscan guy was about 900 BC. Oh, here we can see some an irregularity where the Weifel estimate of the most recent common ancestor is somewhat younger than the age of the sample. This one branch, now it could be due to there aren't so many samples yet, so it doesn't have much to work on. This is all based on random events, and if you don't have very many samples and you have less data, it's not going to be as reliable. But the Weifel estimated the most recent common ancestor between these guys from Virginia. Their ancestors came from England, I think. Their surname is Dawson, ancestral surname. Their common ancestor, they're the closest relatives to the ancient Etruscan. They're more closely related to him than these Italian samples that have been tested so far. They're more closely related to him because they share these three SNPs. Their most recent common ancestor, Weifel estimated at 2,000 years ago, but we know this ancient sample is dated to 2,600 years ago. So their ancestor had to have lived before then. So the true age of these branches could be a couple hundred years older than what is indicated by Weifel. The Etruscans are an interesting civilization. One of the things that makes them so mysterious in the eyes of people today is because their language died out, and that this language is not shown to be related to other major languages that are around today. But they're not unique in being a language isolate. There's lots of ancient groups spoke language isolates that aren't proven to be related to other languages. And they're not unique in that their language died out. All the languages of Europe became extinct. All the languages of Central and Southwestern Europe became extinct, except for Basque after the Romans came. So that's not really a unique thing that your language died out. So that makes you really unique. But still, they're very interesting. If you want to read about it, I recommend this book. I read this book. It's by Lucy Shipley. She's an author of a series of articles on Etruscan archaeology, feminism, and the history of Etruscan studies, as well as experiencing Etruscan pots, ceramics, bodies, and images in Etruria. Okay, I didn't read that book, but I found this book really interesting. One thing that people should understand is there's been a big misconception about the origin of the Etruscans because they had influences from the East, and because their language wasn't shown to be related to any others. Some people thought that they came from the East, like within relatively recent history. But there's no evidence to show that. Instead, their culture gradually developed from the indigenous Proto-Villanovan culture, and there's no genetic evidence that shows that there was some massive influx to Etruria specifically, just only there, bringing Etruscans in the centuries before, during the Iron Age. That didn't happen. Instead, whatever kind of genetic signal that they had that was from the east was what had arrived when the first farmers came. That's their genetic link to to the east, is the first farmers that had come thousands of years before. So they're very interesting people, and somehow our lineage, at least one lineage of JL283, was living in their sphere of influence in the kingdom of the Etruscan kingdom. Now that's a good segue to our Sardinians. I think it's a good segue to our Sardinians because uh, the oldest samples of JL283 in Italy, except for one sample of very low resolution. Unfortunately, the resolution is too low, from 1142 BC, found on the coast. This was the Daunian culture, which is considered to have been colonists from across the Adriatic, and it would kind of make sense because that's where our deeper ancestry. I mean, the older samples, the oldest ancient samples in Europe of JL283 are on the eastern side of the Adriatic. But in Sardinia, we also have some old samples, but they're not Bronze Age. They're old. It's one of them is 1095 BC. Another one is 1250 BC. That's very old. Two of these ancient samples are in the same branch of JL283. It's a branch of Z600. It's one of the oldest branches of Z600. It's very rare. Earlier I showed Z615. This is much more prolific. It gave rise to all these other lineages that are living today. The bulk of our haplogroup that are living today are in Z615 that established itself in the Balkans. But uh, the earlier branching points are found a lot in Sardinia, of this branch of JL283 called Z600. The earlier branching points are found a lot in Sardinia. Uh, Another branch is in Lucca and Firenze. This is Etruria, and then the ancient samples are also in one of these older branches of Z600 from that are Sardinian. Uh, but it's not dating back to the Bronze Age. What I mean is there's no ancient sample that goes back to the Bronze Age that's been found in Sardinia, but it does have a lot of our older branching points in it. Uh, Now, some circumstantial evidence that you could say could lead you to believe that it actually did get established in Sardinia during the Bronze Age, earlier in the Bronze Age, is that this branch that two of these ancient Sardinians are in, and that there's living Sardinians in, this branch is only defined by 4 SNPs. So, I mean, unless these ancient samples were so low resolution, then yeah, these are all from scientific studies, so they could have been low resolution tests. But uh, this lineage could have been formed not that long after Z2509, and Z2509 is estimated at 5,500 years old. So if there's a branch that's downstream of it that only has 4 SNPs defining it, then this could be a branch that is several thousands of years old. But it hasn't been found in an older ancient context. But it could have been there from that period in time, or it's completely possible that this lineage, these ancient samples, that they migrated there during the Iron Age, because that's when they're dating. That's when the samples are dated to, and it could be that it was just a co-migration of related people from some part of the Adriatic coast of the Balkans, where some of our Bronze Age, older Bronze Age samples have been found, that they could have been a later migration, and it's just a lineage that may have died out where the ancestor was really living. But I'm agnostic on this. It could go either way. We'll just have to see if ancient samples are found that show it was in Italy for thousands of years before the Iron Age transition, or if that's never found, and if we find someone in this lineage who's from somewhere mountainous inland part of the Balkans, then maybe we know that it really came from the Balkans. We'll see. That's one of the interesting things that we don't know for sure yet. So if these ancient samples in Sardinia uh, were actually, if their ancestors had actually gotten there earlier, if they actually became established, if these lineages of JZ600 became established in Sardinia and in Tuscany uh, earlier in the Bronze Age, then the way I interpret it is that these guys that our ancestors had migrated maybe along the Danube, and then some of them kept going and made it into Italy, northern Italy, and some of those made it into Sardinia, and just they didn't those guys, those lines that were doing well, like maybe initially after they got into those areas, or maybe a little before they migrated into Italy, they were doing well, and they had they sired these different lineages. Then they went into Italy, and then they just became stagnated and didn't have many more child lineages since then. Uh, but then the one line that did not go in that migration, but just stayed around the Danube area in the central or northern Balkans, Mokran, that guy, that line Z615 ended up uh, later have siring more lineages. But that would be how I would explain why is there a higher diversity in Italy and in northern Italy and Sardinia in the older branches, but yet square that with a migration that came from further east. Uh, it's possible that these other lines that would kind of show this connect the dots in between, that they died out, and so all we're left with is this picture where the diversity in Sardinia and northern Italy is high in the older lineages. Just one of those child lineages ended up surviving in the Balkans, and this could have been a massive co-migration to Italy, just that didn't end up surviving for thousands of years later. Okay, let's look back at the map now. Other ancient samples. I think I'm going to stop at Iron Age. I'm not going to go into the migration era. I'll do another one that's migration era. Another Iron Age sample is this one, 300 BC. It's from the border of what is now Austria and Hungary, on the Hungary side. This guy is in a branch that not very many people are in this branch. Where is it? These guys. The guy from Norway, guy from Greece, a Bulgarian speaker from Castoria, Greece, and a guy from Brazil. And they're related to a guy from Sardinia and Bari, but it's found in an ancient sample, not that old though, but it's the oldest sample we have of this line from 300 BC. And this culture is considered Latin culture, which was Celtic material culture. Now, does it mean that this guy was from the homeland of the Celts? It's possible, but if you look at where all the other samples are found, he's kind of on the northwestern fringe of where we found ancient samples. This one in Germany is much more is a later sample. From the Iron Age samples, he's the most northern and most northwestern. So I interpreted that he was a guy that was living here, and his ancestors, his deeper ancestry is from here, and then the Latin culture of Celts, uh, and also involving actual Celts that moved here and brought their culture there. And later we know that Celts did invade parts of the Balkans and came to Greece and also went to Galatia, Turkey. Okay, another Iron Age sample from 600 BC, 666 BCE, I-5691. This sample near Novo Mesto, Slovenia, it's Z597, but it's negative for Z2507, and that would make it the only possibility of branches that he could be. If he is related to living men, then he would be positive for this branch. But it looked like he has a negative call for one of these SNPs that these Lebanese have. But he could be in one of these. He could be positive for one of these lineages. It's the rare brother of Z2507. Cool thing is there's a guy from Croatia that's positive for this. So, whoops, wrong map. So maybe we'll learn that this guy uh, is actually indicative of the deeper ancestry, that this Croatian guy is his ancestry is from this area. But anyway, this sample is not actually confirmed positive for this lineage. It's just that's the only lineage that is living today that he could be. If he is related to guys living today, he could just be another branch of Z597, but just one that died out. Okay, I think that's it. I think the other ancient samples that are Bronze Age or Iron Age, they aren't high enough resolved. They're not high enough resolved, so I won't go into them. And that was it. Okay, if you appreciate what I'm doing, then um, you could send a donation to me. You can mark that you want me to use this donation to pay for upgrading tests to advance of J2b-L283 people to advance the research. Or if you want, you can just send me a donation and say this is for you. Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.